Hi, welcome back. This is Chef Paul from Gulf Coast State College with the Chef's Corner. Today, we're going to make biscuits. Really easy to make at home, and I hope you guys will try this because it really is a great way to start the morning off. All right, so let's talk about the ingredients. First, we're going to be using all-purpose flour, butter, and it's good to have your butter cold and either cut up into little cubes or even better, shred it on a grater. That makes it really easy to add in. Sugar, baking powder for our leavening, a little bit of salt, and then finally whole milk. You can use buttermilk for this recipe also. All right, so let's do this together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take, and this is a big sifter, it's called a tammy sham, but I'm going to add my flour, and then I'm going to put my salt, baking powder, and my sugar. And what's nice is that they will all fall through and sift and break up any flour clumps. It's really important to go ahead and do that. Now, I know you can buy all-purpose flour that is self-rising. I'm not a real fan of that, and to be honest, I'll tell you why. There's a certain amount of leavening baking powder in that self-rising flour. And unless you use all of that flour, you really don't have any idea whether or not you're getting a good mix of that leavening. So I tend to go ahead and go with nothing but regular all-purpose flour. Now at this point, I'm going to take my butter, and yes, you got to get your hands in here. I'm going to take my butter, drop my butter in here, and now's when I'm going to be, this is called cutting the butter in. It's one of the first things I teach my culinary students in basic baking, is one of the 3 basic mixing methods. And I'm actually mashing the butter in with the flour. And what you're looking for is little tiny pea-sized lumps. If you get the butter too fine, you'll end up with a tougher biscuit. What I'm looking for is to have tiny little lumps of butter. What's going to happen is, as they heat up in the oven, the tiny bit of water that's in the butter will steam, and that's what gives us the flake in our nice biscuits. So we're just going to rub this together, and you'll notice I've still got big clumps of butter. I'm just mashing these with my fingers and rubbing them so that I get a nice small bit of butter. Now, the water in the butter is important. Actually, whole butter contains only about 80% butter. The other 20% consists of milk solids and water, and the water is what provides the steam. So as I'm getting this mix, there are a couple of other things you want to have ready. You want to have your oven turned up to 425 degrees. If it's a convection oven, you can turn it down a little bit lower because convection ovens cook a little hotter. You want to have a sheet pan ready. I use parchment paper on our sheet pans. That way I don't have to worry about anything sticking. A rolling pin, a little bit of flour for your table, and then, of course, a biscuit cutter, whatever you like, whatever size biscuit you like. And then finally, I need a little bit of egg wash. The egg wash is to help paint the top of the biscuits to give them a nice little bit of color and shine. So we're still working on this, and this is going to take a few minutes to get. Now, there are tons of biscuit recipes out there. Some call for buttermilk, some call for more sugar, less sugar, some call for lard or margarine. However you want to make them, that's fine. I'm sure there's someone in your family who makes really good biscuits. Get a chance to sit down with them and learn how they make biscuits, because it's a wonderful thing to have around. Yes, in restaurants we do buy biscuits sometimes, but making a homemade biscuit at one time was a real mark of a decent chef, or at least a decent home cook. So we're getting this, and if you'll notice, as I'm rubbing this, the butter is starting to get smaller and smaller, and it just takes a little bit of time to do this. You could do this if you want to in a food processor, but I find that it cuts the butter up too small, and it actually will end up heating up the butter. And we really don't want to heat the butter up at all. We're trying basically to get the butter mashed like that, as you can see it. And as it gets flour in it, it almost has a bit of plasticity develops. So we're still mixing. And what we're going to do is hopefully have something really special to put with these biscuits a little later. Now, as I'm getting this mixed, still mixing, and we're not quite done, just take and keep rubbing this. And if you'll look, you might even notice that our flour is starting to take on a little bit of a yellowish hue. And that's one of the things we're looking for. We're looking for that butter to really evenly distribute, and it's just one of those things that takes a little time. Now, you may have seen a little tool called a pastry cutter. It's a kind of a handle with multiple blades. Those actually do work for this, but I find nothing really replaces the feel of getting your hands in the work. And as a pastry chef, this is something that is a lot of fun to me, getting my hands in my work. All right, so we're almost there. We're going to use some nice fresh whole milk to mix this with. And I want to give you the one thing that I go over and over again with my students when it comes to this mixing method. Do not overmix. I can't stress that enough. We're wanting a flaky biscuit. If we overmix, we're going to end up with a mealy, bready biscuit. And that may work in some places, but not here. We want something that that you can peel them apart and see those beautiful flakes in the biscuit. So we're almost there. I know I've said that before, but I really mean it this time. So after we get these nice and mashed up, and you can see that I'm actually flattening the butter into almost flakes. And that's really a nice thing to have. Keep mashing it, and we're about ready to go ahead and add our milk. Now, I'm going to make a well in the center of this, and in that well, I'm going to pour all the milk at one time. Okay? I'm going to turn this over and mix this, and I'm doing it just with my hands today because we really don't need to get anything else dirty if we don't have to. All right, so I think we're good. Yeah, we got some big chunks of butter in that, but that's all right. They'll be great in our biscuits. So let's make our well. Make sure, give it one last look. Little rub to get this off, and then we're going to add our milk. All of our milk. We're going to use our hands, and we're going to use another tool that I find really valuable, and it's a plastic scraper. And I'm just going to turn this so that it begins to wet everything. And that's really all we want to do is just get everything moist. It's going to look like a gloppy mess here, but that's all right. Almost. Believe it or not, we're almost done. I know it doesn't look like it, but I promise we're almost done. Now we've got to put a little flour on our table. Now, the way to do this, take a little flour in your hands and simply throw it. We're going to take all of this and we're going to just simply, and I know you're saying to yourself, that's not mixed. Oh, it is mixed. We're going to dump it on the table. All that mess. Now comes the part we got to make sure we're not overworking this. All I'm going to do, put a little flour on my hands, and I'm going to fold this together. And I'm going to knead it only a couple of times. I'm really trying very hard to work this as little as possible. I've created all those beautiful flakes of butter, and I want to make sure that I don't overwork them. So we can use this to just kind of begin to bring it together. And you can already see that it's starting to kind of come together, isn't it? We can use our plastic scraper to turn it. Just trying to get everything to come together. And yes, I know it's still breaking up a little bit, but if you notice, we're starting to see a little bit of a dough come together. And if you notice, what I do is I'm taking and lifting towards myself and folding. And guess what? Our biscuit dough is done. I'm going to take and add a little bit more flour to our table, and I can hold that up. You can see that the dough is nice and done. Throw a little bit of flour on the table. Now comes the time to roll it out. More flour on top. And if you want to get your hands clean, put a little flour on them. And they come nice and clean. Now, I start in the middle, and I'm not one for rolling off the end, because all that does is really mash down your biscuit dough. Roll it both ways. And if you look close, you can see bits of butter. It's going to make for really wonderful biscuits. You don't even need a rolling pin, to be honest. You could simply mash it down with your hands. You want to make sure that it does move. You don't want to let it stick to your table at all. So I can, a little flour again. And you want to make some nice, pretty country style biscuits. And look at those nice bits of butter in there. All right, it's time to cut. We're going to take our biscuit cutter. And this is our biscuit cutter. And I'm going to tap it in a little flour. I've got a sheet pan ready. Now, bakers are cheap, so I want to use every bit of this I possibly can. And if you notice, I'm not going to spin this. I'm just going to cut down and pull it out. If you spin it, you'll tend to seal the edges. So I'm just trying to get this nice. Now, one other thing I teach my students is that there is no quality without consistency. So it's important to try to be as consistent as possible with your cuts and with the thickness of your dough. You want all the biscuits to look the same, or if not exactly the same, to look as close to the same as possible. You wouldn't like it if you went into a restaurant and one person had a giant steak and another person had a little steak. Same way with bread or biscuits or almost anything. We're trying to find a way to be as consistent as possible so that our products look great. And not only look the same, but if they're consistent, they will also cook the same. And that's kind of important. We've got some nice looking biscuits here. And if you notice, I'm spreading them out. There is a little scrap, and I'm going to talk about the scrap in just a few minutes. Now, the first time you roll biscuit dough, you're going to end up with the best possible biscuits. You've worked the dough very little, but invariably, you're going to have, at the end, you're going to have some dough left over. Now, when you roll that dough back together, you're doing something. You're basically activating the gluten, and gluten is the protein that's found in flour, and it also is what makes our bread, gives strength and structure to bread and to baked goods. Well, the more you work gluten, the stronger it gets. So the problem with all of this is that when we rework this together, this is going to make for a little bit of a tougher biscuit. But that's fine. We're just going to mash it all back together and try to knead this as little as possible. You can't help but have to knead it some because it's got to come back together. But if I can do it, that was only, I think I only needed that 2 times. Still a little bit taller than my other biscuits, so we'll flatten it out just a little bit. You can still see I haven't destroyed the nice flakes of butter that are in there. Don't worry about the mess on the table. Bakers, we make messes. Look at that. So now I've got a nice full pan of biscuits. But we're not done yet. We are going to clean this up. Another nice thing this plastic scraper's for. And if you want to, take this biscuit dough, you can roll this out nice and thin and make dumplings with it for the next time you make chicken and dumplings. They make great dumplings. What we've got to do now, though, is we've got to put something on top. And what we're going to do is something called an egg wash. An egg wash is simply a couple of eggs mixed with an equal part of water. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the top of each one. So here we go. Doesn't take much. Now you can wash with egg, you could wash with milk, or you could leave them plain. What's going to happen is the proteins and the fat are going to help the top of this biscuit get a little bit of color and a little bit of shine to it. Nothing like a pretty biscuit. Now, when it comes to rising in the oven, the closer you have your biscuits together, typically the higher they will rise. But we're going to get these painted really quickly here. And if a little drips down, don't worry about it. It's not going to hurt. All right. So, and last one. All right. Wonderful. Now it's time to take them to the oven. All right, so our biscuits are almost done. The nice thing, if you got an oven with a glass door, you can actually watch them bake. Be careful, your oven times will vary. You need to learn how your oven cooks. So you got to bake the same thing more than once so that you can understand that 400 may not be 400. Here we go, our biscuits are almost done. We're getting ready to pull them out of the oven right about now. And there we go. Oh, there's nothing like the smell of fresh homemade biscuits. If you take a look, you can actually see the flakiness of these biscuits and how they simply pull apart. So, make some biscuits. Your family will appreciate you. So this is Chef Paul saying thanks again for joining me in the Chef's Corner, and we'll see you next time.